Good morning. Before I get started with unpacking our gospel reading, I want to say how desperately that I wanted to be with you all in person today as we wrap up something that I feel so passionately about, discerning who it is we are as individuals and as a congregation. I am so proud of you all for the conversations that have taken place and the openness that I have witnessed. And as I quarantine with COVID once again, I find myself wanting to express my gratitude for this church and all who are a part of it. I am also grateful for the leadership that we are blessed with. And today, I am especially grateful for Carol Gallimore for leading the service in my absence, and also for the many gifted others who are taking part in a way to make today a unique and special experience as we seek to wrap up our Epiphany series, discerning who we are. This is indeed a wonderful congregation, full of faith and life and love, and it's a privilege to be called your pastor. Now, on to the reading. A reading from the Gospel is taken from what is commonly known as Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Within it, Jesus names out loud what is widely taken for granted by his listeners, and then he challenges their understanding. And in this way, he starts from a place that is concrete and solid for his listeners, meeting them exactly where they are, and then he transitions. He transitions to new thoughts with a simple yet bold little word, but. It's in this way that he's able to name what is understood to be good, sound advice, and then unpack it from a different perspective. He says, you have heard it said. You have heard it said that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. He says, you have heard it said. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you that you must not oppose those who want to harm you. Therefore, if people slap you on your right cheek, you must turn your left cheek to them as well. What Jesus is referring to here is known as the law of retaliation, and it's a law that is found in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. Now, at first read, it may appear that Jesus is encouraging us to cooperate with those who want to cause harm. After all, not only do his words tell us not to resist the evildoers, he also encourages his listeners to offer the other cheek, another coat, or even another mile. So on the surface, he seems to be encouraging us to simply give up and give in, lay down and take it. However, when we dive deeper, we find that his stance is actually rooted in profound resistance, an unexpected refusal to play the game of those seeking to inflict harm. For example, by going the extra mile, that first mile is likewise refigured from something forced into something chosen, so that what might superficially seem to be docility is actually at a deeper level a form of non-adversarial defiance. Jesus' words here have echoed down through the centuries, inspiring many to move away from violence in response to opposition. Infamous leaders, even those outside of the Christian faith, have leaned on Jesus' teachings here, such as Mohandas Gandhi, who himself referred to this particular passage in the Bible as being very influential in his non-violent strategy of resistance against the British colonial occupation in India. So in one sense, Jesus critiques the law of retaliation against any brute policy of an eye for an eye, while in another sense, he recapitulates the inner logic of it on a deeper level. If an eye for an eye means that proper restitution for a wrongful act is its mirror image or reversal, Jesus effectively adopts this very principle, but argues that the true reversal The true reversal of an opponent's opposition is not yet another act of opposition. Rather, the true reversal is an act of non-opposition, a creative response that works towards extinguishing not just the opponent, but rather the entire opposition. In other words, Jesus recommends a kind of moral jujitsu, a way of discipleship, a way of life that ostensibly does not resist an aggressor, but in its very nature resists the underlying paradigm of hostility and contempt involved in striking someone's cheek in the first place. This is all summed up beautifully in verse 44, when Jesus says, "Love your enemies and pray for those who harass you." In the face of the most extreme opponents, Jesus advises defiance, but not defiance directed against the enemies themselves, since doing so only serves to perpetuate that opposition, but rather a deeper defiance. A defiance directed against the vicious, endless cycle of enemy making in the first place. In other words, do not fight fire with fire, rather fight fire with water, thereby refusing to take part in the insidious game at all. So when we encounter fire, we simply put it out completely. It must be said, however, that one of the chief hazards of interpreting this text this way is that it can so easily be misunderstood to somehow recommend acquiescence in the face of violence, harm, and evil. And this can't be further from the truth, for Jesus always stood on the side of the victim. Therefore, Jesus isn't advising that victims accept their wounds and embrace their assailants. He also isn't saying that witnesses to evil should do nothing to resist it, ignoring those in harm's way. What Jesus is saying is that he's telling us that we simply shouldn't play in any system at all that perpetuates and supports violence and harm of any kind. And while this does entail loving and praying for the perpetrator, by the same token, it also entails that whenever possible, we stop cooperating with any system that allows or enables perpetrators to continue causing harm in the first place. All of this profound, complex advice does indeed place a but in the midst of our common cultural and even religious understanding at times. We might wonder how it is that we can possibly live into such a call. One way that we can do this is by letting it be made known that this church and the people who are a part of it stand firmly alongside those who have been harmed or stand in harm's way. And another way we can do this is by loudly proclaiming that we are not like the churches that separate and alienate those who are different. No, we are a church of oneness and love. And this leads us to the welcoming statement that we've been working towards. Throughout Epiphany, we've been playing a game with our welcoming call, where we've been shouting out opposites, whether you are a this or a that, or somewhere in between, you are welcome here. And last week, we discerned the groups that are often pushed to the fray of church life, and then we held up groups, those individuals who have ended up feeling unwanted, unimportant, and unwelcome in churches. And then we brainstormed a list of those that we welcome or would like to welcome into the love that is found here at Hamilton Park United Church of Christ. And from all of this, a welcoming statement has been born. Now, let me assure you that this is not an official welcoming statement per se. For us to have that, we need to take more time to sit with it as a congregation and eventually decide whether we can communally agree with what's written there. For now, this welcoming statement is a starting block for us to pray over and talk over. And after today, we will allow this statement to percolate, so to speak, throughout Lent, prayerfully allowing our journey with Christ to bring us to new life and love. All we're going to do today is sit with what has been gathered thus far. And for this, I now hand over the microphone to Carol.